Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Dan Murphy and I saw Lauren Phillips for the last time 3 meters ahead of me on the trail before she simply disappeared. But let me back up. October 15th, 2018, 2:47 p.m. GPS coordinates 47 Tondent 821 Badagrian, 123 6044 degree W, Olympic National Forest, Washington State. I was conducting a routine trail safety inspection on the Solduke River Trail when I encountered Lauren Phillips, a 24-year-old graduate student from University of Washington, researching mycorrhizal fungi networks. She'd been camping at site number 47 for 3 days, alone, which already had my analytical mind firing warning signals. The October air carried that sharp bite of approaching winter, mixed with the earthy decay of fallen alder leaves, and something else, something that made my nostrils flare with unease. As a ranger, you develop a sixth sense for when the forest feels wrong. The Douglas firs towered above us like cathedral spires, but the usual chorus of Steller's jays and Pacific wrens had gone silent. Dead silent. Lauren was about 5'6", brunette ponytail, wearing a UW Huskies hoodie and Merrell hiking boots, size 7, based on the tread patterns I'd been tracking for the last mile. She had that eager academic enthusiasm that reminded me of myself in forestry school, before my colleagues learned to dismiss my overthinking every natural phenomenon. "Ranger Murphy," she called out, adjusting her heavy research backpack. "Perfect timing. I was just heading to grid section C7 to collect more samples. The fungal networks here are absolutely fascinating. They're behaving in ways that don't match any published studies." I pulled out my handheld GPS unit, a Garmin eTrex 30X that the Park Service had finally upgraded to in 2017, and checked her coordinates against my patrol route. Grid C7 was technically within bounds, but it bordered the restricted area where we'd had incidents, missing hikers in the 1990s, unexplained animal deaths, stuff that didn't make it into official reports because it couldn't be explained scientifically. "Ms. Phillips," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead despite the 52-degree temperature, "I'd recommend staying closer to the main trail. Cell service cuts out completely past marker 14, and we've had some unusual wildlife activity in that sector." She laughed, and the sound echoed strangely among the ancient trees. "Unusual how? I've been tracking predator patterns for my research. Haven't seen anything more dangerous than a curious black bear." My radio crackled with static. Unit 23 checking in from the visitor center. "Murphy, what's your 20? Over." "Mile marker 12, Solduke River Trail, conducting safety check. All clear so far." "Over." I clipped the radio back to my belt, but it continued emitting low static that hadn't been there before. Lauren was already moving ahead, her boots crunching through the carpet of fallen leaves. The sound was wrong. Too sharp, too echoing, like footsteps in an empty cathedral. I followed, my own Danner Acadia boots feeling heavier with each step. "The fungal networks are exhibiting unprecedented interconnectivity," she called back to me, pulling out a digital camera, one of those new mirrorless models that were becoming popular with researchers. "It's like they're communicating in ways we've never documented, almost like they're aware." A chill that had nothing to do with temperature crawled up my spine. The forest around us seemed to pulse with a subtle wrongness that my analytical mind couldn't categorize. The Douglas firs leaned inward at impossible angles, their bark showing spiral patterns I'd never noticed in 15 years of forestry work. We reached a small clearing where Lauren's equipment was set up. Soil pH meters, sample containers, and a small laptop showing data I couldn't interpret. But what caught my attention were the trees. Every single tree surrounding the clearing showed deep gouges in the bark, spiral patterns that looked almost like scales. "Lauren," I said, my voice coming out rougher than intended, "how long have those markings been there?" She looked where I was pointing, and I saw her face pale beneath her academic confidence. Those weren't there this morning. I documented this entire area. Those markings are fresh." My heart rate spiked from resting 72 BPM to over 100 in seconds. I could feel my pulse hammering in my temples, that metallic taste of adrenaline flooding my mouth. My hands instinctively went to my utility belt. Knife, radio, first aid kit, pepper spray. Standard ranger equipment that suddenly felt pathetically inadequate. "We need to head back," I said, pulling out my GPS again. But the screen showed only static, coordinates jumbling into impossible numbers. "My GPS is malfunctioning, can you check yours?" Lauren fumbled with her phone, an iPhone X that should have had decent GPS capability. "No signal, and my GPS app is showing. This can't be right. It says we're 127 feet underground." The wrongness in the air intensified, carrying with it a scent I finally recognized from my biology training. The musky, acrid smell of reptile musk mixed with something ancient and alien. Something that made every primitive instinct scream danger. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong in any North American forest. A low, rhythmic hissing that seemed to come from the trees themselves. Not wind through branches, but something breathing, something massive. "Lauren, we're leaving now." I grabbed her arm, but she was staring at something behind me, her brown eyes dilated with terror. I turned around slowly, my analytical mind trying to process what I was seeing while my body prepared for fight or flight. Emerging from between two massive Douglas firs was something that violated every law of physics I understood. It stood roughly 8 feet tall, but its height seemed to shift and flow like liquid. The upper torso was humanoid. Broad shoulders, muscled arms, even what looked like human skin. But that skin had a subtle scaled pattern that caught the filtered sunlight like iridescent metal. Its lower body was pure serpent, a massive coiled tail that had to be 20 feet long, thick as a telephone pole, covered in scales that shifted color from deep green to obsidian black. But it was the face that made my bladder nearly release. Human features, nose, mouth, even hair, but the eyes were pure reptile. Vertical pupils and irises that swirled with hypnotic patterns, colors that didn't exist in nature. Golden spirals within amber depths that seemed to pull at my consciousness. "Don't look directly at it," I whispered to Lauren, but when I glanced sideways, she was already caught. Her eyes were locked on the creature's gaze, her mouth slightly open, drool beginning to form at the corner of her lips. The thing spoke, and its voice was like gravel mixed with the sound of scales sliding across stone. "Daniel Murphy, Forest Guardian. Your mentastes is of numbers and fear." How did it know my name? My analytical brain tried to rationalize. Maybe it had heard my radio check-in, maybe it was some kind of elaborate hoax. But the way it moved defied physics. Its serpentine lower body seemed to flow rather than slither, and I could see through parts of it to the trees behind. "I have been hunting in this sea woods since before your species has walked upright," it continued, its hypnotic gaze shifting between Lauren and me. "But this one," it gestured toward Lauren with a too long arm that bent at impossible angles. "She has been calling to me with her Irith magics." Lauren's mycorrhizal research, the fungal networks. My mind raced through the possibilities. Had she somehow activated something ancient through her soil sampling, connected with something that had been dormant in the forest's root system? "Lauren!" I shouted, grabbing her shoulder and shaking her. But she was completely entranced, taking slow mechanical steps toward the creature. Her research equipment lay forgotten, her phone dropping from nerveless fingers to shatter on the rocks. The creature's tail coiled behind Lauren, and I caught a glimpse of what it was planning. Along the inner curves of its serpentine body were dozens of human-shaped bulges. Previous victims, still visible beneath the translucent scales, faces frozen in silent screams. My family flashed through my mind. Sarah making coffee in our Sequim kitchen, Emma practicing violin, Tommy building Lego castles. I'd promised them I'd be home for dinner. Promised Emma I wouldn't miss her school concert next week. Those promises gave me strength that pure adrenaline couldn't. I pulled out my radio, static crackling through the speaker. "Unit 23 to base, we have a 10-999, immediate backup required, coordinates." But the coordinates kept shifting on my GPS, showing impossible elevations and negative latitudes. The creature's attention focused on me, those hypnotic eyes boring into my consciousness. I felt my will beginning to slip, my analytical mind fragmenting under alien pressure. But 15 years of cataloging, measuring, and documenting kicked in. I started reciting every detail I could observe, keeping my mind anchored to concrete facts. Bipedal serpentine hybrid, approximately 8 feet vertical height, serpentine portion 20 feet length, scales exhibiting prismatic refraction, impossible anatomical structure suggesting non-terrestrial origin. I muttered under my breath, using scientific observation as a mental shield. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Dan's situation? Comment below. The creature hissed in what might have been amusement. Your mind is different number, thinker. Less tasty but more interesting. Lauren was now within arm's reach of the thing, her movements puppet-like. I could see the exact moment it planned to strike, its neck muscles coiling like a spring, jaw unhinging to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth, and a bifurcated tongue that dripped some kind of paralytic venom. I did the only thing my panicking mind could think of. I grabbed the emergency flare from my belt, standard Park Service issue, magnesium-based, burns at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and triggered it. The brilliant red light exploded through the clearing, and for just a moment the creature's hypnotic hold wavered. "Lauren, run!" I screamed, grabbing her arm and yanking her backward. The sudden movement broke her trance, and she stumbled, her academic composure shattering into pure terror. The creature's shriek was like metal tearing, a sound that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. But something unexpected happened. The flare's intense light seemed to cause it physical pain. Its form flickered, becoming more translucent. And I realized this thing wasn't entirely corporeal. We ran. Lauren's research training kicked in, and she moved like a track athlete, leaping over fallen logs and dodging low branches with surprising agility. Behind us I could hear the creature pursuing, not the heavy slithering I expected, but a sound like wind through leaves, like reality itself was bending around its passage. My radio suddenly crackled to life with perfect clarity. "Unit 23, this is base. What's your emergency? We're showing your GPS signal in 3 different locations simultaneously." "Base, we have an unknown predator stalking civilians on Sol Duke Trail, requesting immediate backup and extraction. Current position." I looked at my GPS and nearly stumbled. It was showing our coordinates as constantly shifting, like we were moving at impossible speeds through folded space. But then I heard Lauren scream behind me. I spun around to see her caught in what looked like a loop of space-time. She was running forward, but somehow moving backward, toward the creature that was flowing through the trees like liquid shadow. The hypnotic eyes found mine again, and this time I felt my consciousness being pulled apart like cotton candy. My analytical mind fragmented as alien intelligence probed my memories, my fears, my desperate love for my family. "Your numbers cannot save her," it hissed, Lauren now floating somehow in the coils of its tail. "She has still already joined in my collection." I could see Lauren's face through the translucent scales as the creature's lower body began to absorb her. Her eyes were wide with terror, her mouth moving in silent screams. Around her, other faces pressed against the interior of the serpentine body. Hikers from decades past, all perfectly preserved in their final moments of horror. The creature's human torso leaned down toward me, its face shifting between reptilian and human features like a living optical illusion. "But your mind I will keep conscious, to catalog the pain of others." That's when something inside me snapped. Not just terror or adrenaline, but a cold analytical fury that was purely human. This thing thought it could dissect my mind like a research specimen, use my love for my family as entertainment. I pulled out my multi-tool, a Leatherman wave that had served me faithfully for 8 years, and extended the largest blade. Not because I thought I could physically harm this entity, but because the steel was cold iron. Old folklore, old warnings that my grandmother used to tell me about things that didn't belong in our world. The creature recoiled as I advanced, the metal seeming to cause it genuine pain. Its form flickered more violently, becoming less substantial. "Iron in the wound," I shouted, driving the blade toward its torso. The moment the steel contacted its flesh, reality seemed to tear. The hypnotic hold shattered completely, and Lauren dropped to the forest floor, gasping and sobbing. The creature's shriek was like a dimensional rift opening, and through the sound I heard something impossible. The voices of all its previous victims, suddenly able to speak again. "The roots," Lauren gasped, pointing to the ground beneath us. "It's connected to the fungal network. That's how it travels, how it bends space. The mycelium is its nervous system." My analytical mind seized on this information. I pulled out my emergency GPS beacon, the kind used for life or death situations, and activated it. But instead of pointing it skyward, I drove it deep into the soil, into the network of fungal threads that Lauren had been studying. The electromagnetic pulse from the beacon disrupted something fundamental. The creature's scream became a wail of genuine anguish as its connection to the forest's root system was severed. For the first time, it looked truly alien. Not a predator in its element, but something lost and wounded. "You cannot destroy what has existed since the deep roots first touched stone," it hissed, but its voice was weakening, its form becoming more and more translucent. "Maybe not," I said, helping Lauren to her feet. "But I can sure as hell make you find somewhere else to hunt." The creature began to fade, its serpentine body dissolving like smoke, but just before it vanished completely, those hypnotic eyes found mine one last time. "I know where you live, Daniel Murphy. I know the scent of your young. The next forest you enter may be the last." Then it was gone, leaving only the normal sounds of the Olympic wilderness. Birds calling, wind through ancient trees, and the distant sound of SR helicopters approaching our GPS signal. Lauren and I sat in silence for a long moment, both shaking from adrenaline crash and the impossibility of what we'd survived. My radio crackled with incoming rescue coordination, GPS finally showing stable coordinates, reality reasserting itself around us. "The research data," Lauren whispered, staring at her shattered phone. "All my documentation about the fungal networks. No one will believe what we experienced." "Good," I said, thinking about Emma and Tommy, about the promise I'd made to be home for dinner. Some things shouldn't be documented. Some connections shouldn't be made. But as we waited for extraction, I caught Lauren staring at the soil beneath us with that same academic fascination that had started this whole nightmare. The mycelium network was still there, still connecting every tree in thousands of acres of ancient forest. And somewhere in that vast underground web, something alien was learning how to reconnect. I made a mental note to request transfer to a different district, somewhere without old-growth forests, somewhere without root systems deep enough to hide interdimensional predators. As the SAR team airlifted us out, I looked down at the canopy. "My name is Tyler Brooks, e eu deveria ter esquecido o caso de Jordan Hayes, mas algo me trouxe de volta àquela floresta amaldiçoada." 3 months had passed since the 22-year-old college student vanished without a trace from the Blackwater Trail in Olympic National Park, and officially the case was cold as the October morning that now bit through my worn Ranger jacket. But the dreams wouldn't stop. Dreams of Jordan's face twisted in terror, dreams of something inhuman wearing human skin, dreams that tasted like copper and smelled like rotting flesh. I adjusted my Motorola radio to channel 16 and checked my GPS coordinates. 478029 Tunadigan, 123.6044 DW. The same coordinates where Jordan's backpack had been found, torn and bloodied, with claw marks that the forensics team couldn't identify. My hands shook as I pulled the crime scene photos from my jacket pocket, the ones I wasn't supposed to have. The metallic taste of fear coated my tongue, mixing with the bitter remnants of gas station coffee that had long since gone cold in my thermos. The forest felt wrong. In my 15 years as a ranger, I'd learned to read the wilderness like a book, but this place read like a page torn from hell itself. The usual sounds, squirrels chattering, woodpeckers drumming, ravens calling, had been replaced by an oppressive silence that made my skin crawl. Even the wind seemed to whisper warnings as it rustled through the Douglas firs, their ancient branches creaking like arthritic fingers pointing toward some unseen horror. I'd been down this path before, literally and figuratively. 5 years ago, in these same woods, I'd encountered something that defied explanation. A thing that wore the face of a missing hiker, but moved wrong, spoke wrong, smelled wrong. The official report listed it as a successful rescue, but the scars on my forearms and the nightmares that followed told a different story. The thing had nearly torn my throat out before I'd managed to drive my emergency flare deep into what should have been its chest, watching it shriek and dissolve into shadow and sulfur. My iPhone buzzed with a text from my wife, Sarah. "Emma has her soccer game at 3. You promised you'd be there." The photo she'd attached showed our 8-year-old daughter in her bright yellow jersey, gap-toothed smile beaming at the camera. I touched the screen, my calloused fingers trembling against the cold glass, knowing I might not make it home to see that smile again. But Jordan Hayes' mother had called me yesterday, sobbing into the phone about new evidence. A homeless man seen near the trail the day Jordan disappeared, a man who'd vanished as mysteriously as he'd appeared. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees since I'd entered the forest, my breath forming visible clouds despite the afternoon sun. According to my digital thermometer, it was 68 degrees when I'd parked at the trailhead. Now it read 53 degrees and falling. Unnatural cold was always the first sign. I'd learned that the hard way. My wool socks were already damp with sweat inside my steel-toed Danner boots, but the rest of my body felt like I'd stepped into a freezer, goosebumps rising along my arms beneath my long-sleeved uniform shirt. I followed the GPS coordinates deeper into the forest, my gear belt heavy with standard equipment. Pepper spray, emergency whistle, first aid kit, emergency radio, and the unofficial edition I'd started carrying after my last supernatural encounter, a tactical knife blessed by Father Martinez at St. Augustine's. The priest had questioned my sanity, but he'd blessed the blade anyway, muttering prayers in Latin as he sprinkled holy water on the steel. The weight of it against my hip was both comforting and terrifying, a reminder that some threats required more than standard ranger protocol. The trail markers should have been visible every quarter mile, but I'd passed 3 missing signs in the last hour. Park maintenance would never let that slide, which meant something, or someone, had deliberately removed them. My Garmin GPS showed I was still on the correct path, but the forest around me looked increasingly unfamiliar, as if the landscape itself was shifting when I wasn't looking directly at it. The Douglas firs seemed taller, their shadows darker, their branches reaching toward me like gnarled claws, eager to drag me down into whatever hell had claimed Jordan Hayes. A branch snapped somewhere behind me, the sharp crack echoing through the unnatural silence like a gunshot. I spun around, my hand instinctively moving to my radio, but saw nothing except more trees and gathering shadows. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat, taste it on my tongue. The Forest Service training manual never covered what to do when the forest itself became your enemy, when every shadow might hide something that had crawled out of a nightmare and taken residence in the waking world. The smell hit me before I saw anything. That distinctive cocktail of unwashed human body, rotting teeth, and something else. Something that reminded me of sulfur and burnt hair. My stomach clenched, bile rising in my throat as memories of my last encounter flooded back. I'd smelled that same combination 5 years ago, right before the thing wearing Tommy Patterson's face had tried to tear my jugular out with fingernails that had grown into claws. The official report said I'd suffered animal attack injuries, but no animal I knew could speak in a dead man's voice, while its eyes burned with hellfire. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Tyler Brooks' situation? Comment below. I keyed my radio with shaking fingers, the plastic slick with sweat despite the unnatural cold. Unit 47 to dispatch, requesting backup at coordinates 47.8021 north, 123.044 west. Possible disturbance. The static that came back sounded wrong, filled with what might have been whispers in a language that predated human civilization. Dispatch, do you copy? Nothing but that static, and underneath it, something that sounded almost like laughter. The homeless man materialized from behind a massive cedar, like he'd been part of the tree itself. his appearance so sudden and silent that my body reacted before my mind could process what I was seeing. He was exactly as Jordan's mother had described, tall and gaunt with stringy gray hair hanging past his shoulders and clothes that looked like they'd been scavenged from a dozen different sources. But it was his eyes that confirmed my worst fears. They burned with an inner light that no human eyes should possess, a red glow that seemed to pulse with each beat of my racing heart. "Help me," he said, his voice a perfect imitation of human desperation. But there was something underneath it, something that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. "Please, I'm lost. I've been walking for days." He took a step toward me, and I noticed his feet made no sound on the forest floor covered with dry leaves and fallen branches. That was when I saw his hands, fingers too long, nails grown into yellowed claws caked with what looked like dried blood and bits of tissue. My training kicked in even as my supernatural experience screamed warnings. I took 2 steps back, my hand moving to my pepper spray while my other hand gripped the radio. "Sir, I need you to stay where you are. I'm a park ranger, and I'm here to help." The words felt like lies in my mouth because I knew this thing wasn't lost, wasn't human, and sure as hell wasn't looking for help. It was hunting, and I just walked into its territory like a lamb into a slaughterhouse. The thing wearing the homeless man's face smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too many, arranged in rows like a shark's mouth. "I know who you are, Tyler Brooks," it said, and my blood turned to ice water in my veins. "I've been waiting for you to come back. We have unfinished business, you and I." The voice was changing now, layers of sound that shouldn't be able to come from a human throat, harmonics that made my inner ear feel like it was bleeding. It lunged at me with speed that defied physics, crossing the 15 feet between us in less than a heartbeat. I threw myself sideways, my ranger training and supernatural paranoia saving my life as claws ripped through the air where my head had been a split second before. I hit the ground hard, my shoulder slamming into a fallen log with enough force to send lightning bolts of pain down my arm. The thing landed where I'd been standing, its bare feet, now ending in talons that dug furrows in the earth, smoking where they touched the ground. I rolled, my hand finding the tactical knife as adrenaline flooded my system with enough force to make my vision tunnel. The blessed blade came free of its sheath with a whisper of steel, and immediately the temperature around us dropped another 10 degrees. The demon thing hissed, a sound like steam escaping from a broken radiator, and for a moment its human disguise flickered, revealing something underneath that my brain refused to fully process. Gray skin stretched too tight over bones that bent in impossible directions, muscle that writhed like live snakes, and a face that was a blasphemous mockery of human features. "You can't hide behind blessed steel forever, Ranger," it snarled, circling me like a predator. With each step, the ground beneath its feet withered and blackened, leaving perfect footprints of decay in the forest floor. "I tasted your blood once before. I know your fear, your guilt, your desperate love for that pretty wife and precious daughter. Sarah and Emma, isn't it? Such beautiful names, such fragile mortal bodies." The mention of my family's names hit me like a physical blow, rage exploding through my chest with enough force to override the terror. Nothing threatened my girls and lived to talk about it. I surged to my feet, the blessed knife weaving through the air in patterns Father Martinez had taught me, the Latin prayers he'd made me memorize flowing from my lips in a voice I barely recognized as my own. "Get the fuck away from my family, you bastard." The demon staggered back as if my words had physical weight, its stolen face contorting with fury. "Your faith is stronger than it was 5 years ago," it admitted, genuine surprise coloring its inhuman voice. "But it won't be enough. It's never enough. I've already marked you, Tyler Brooks. Your soul bears my signature, and eventually, inevitably, you'll belong to me." It was then I noticed the other smells mixing with the demon's stench. Fresh human blood, the metallic scent of terror, and underneath it all, the distinctive smell of Jordan Hayes' favorite perfume. I'd smelled it on the personal effects her mother had brought to the ranger station, a sweet vanilla scent that now seemed obscene coming from this creature of shadow and sulfur. My stomach lurched as I realized what that meant. What this thing had done to the college student who'd just been trying to enjoy a weekend hike. "Where is Jordan?" I demanded, keeping the knife between us as we continued our deadly dance through the trees. "What did you do to her?" But even as I asked, I could see pieces of the answer in the thing's claws. Fabric that matched Jordan's hiking jacket, a gold earring that caught the fading sunlight, and worse, much worse, fragments of tissue and bone that had once been part of a living, breathing human being. The demon's laugh was like breaking glass mixed with screaming children. "She lasted longer than most," it said, and I could hear genuine admiration in its voice. 3 days before she stopped begging. 3 days before she accepted that no one was coming to save her. By the end, she was praying for death, begging me to just finish her instead of... It gestured to its claws, still decorated with evidence of its feast. My rage exploded into something beyond human emotion, beyond rational thought. The blessed knife felt like an extension of my will as I launched myself at the demon, Father Martinez's prayers flowing from my lips in a continuous stream. The blade connected with the thing's chest, and the forest lit up with brilliant white light as blessed steel met supernatural flesh. The demon's shriek shattered several small trees and sent every bird within a mile radius fleeing in terror. But it didn't go down. Instead, it grabbed my wrist with one clawed hand, its strength enough to grind the bones together as it lifted me off the ground. "You think your human god cares about this place?" It hissed, its face inches from mine, breath that smelled like a charnel house washing over me. "This forest is older than your Christ, older than your prayers, older than your pathetic species. I was here when the first tree took root, and I'll be here when the last human draws breath." The claws of its free hand raked across my ribs, tearing through my uniform shirt and the Kevlar vest underneath like they were tissue paper. Fire exploded across my chest as talons opened 4 parallel gashes from just below my collarbone to my belt line. Blood poured down my torso, soaking into my clothing and dripping onto the forest floor, where it steamed and hissed as if the very earth was acid. My vision grayed at the edges, but somewhere in the growing darkness, I could hear my daughter's voice from this morning. "Daddy, promise you'll come home safe." Emma's 8-year-old face floated in my mind, followed by Sarah's smile from our wedding day. The way she'd looked at me like I was her whole world. That love, that desperate need to see them again, to keep my promise to come home safe, gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. I drove my knee into the demon's midsection with everything I had left, and when it doubled over in surprise, I brought the pommel of the blessed knife down on the back of its skull. The impact sent shockwaves through my arm, but the demon released me, staggering backward with what looked like genuine pain twisting its stolen features. Black blood, thick as motor oil and twice as foul, leaked from the wound, steaming where it hit the ground. "Impossible," it gasped, touching the wound with trembling fingers. "No human has that kind of power. No human love burns that bright." But I could see fear in its burning eyes now. Real terror that maybe, just maybe, it had picked the wrong prey this time. I pressed my advantage, slashing with the blessed blade in a pattern that would have looked like choreography if anyone had been there to see it. Each cut drew more of that black blood. Each prayer that fell from my lips made the demon step backward, until we'd moved deeper into the forest, away from the trail, into a clearing I'd never seen before despite 15 years of ranging these woods. The clearing was wrong in every way that mattered. The grass was dead in perfect geometric patterns, forming symbols that hurt to look at directly. In the center stood what might have once been an altar, carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And scattered around the altar, like discarded toys, were personal effects I recognized from a dozen missing person reports spanning the last decade. Jordan's hiking boots sat next to what looked like a child's baseball cap, which was next to a woman's purse, which was next to things I didn't want to examine too closely. "You see," the demon said, spreading its arms to encompass the unholy scene. "This is my church, Ranger. This is where I worship. Every soul I've taken, every life I've ended, every prayer I've answered with screaming. It all leads here. Your Jordan Hayes died on that altar, and so will you, and eventually, so will everyone you've ever loved." But as I looked at the nightmare tableau, I noticed something the demon had missed in its gloating. Carved into the side of the altar, barely visible in the fading light, were words scratched with desperate fingers. Tyler Brooks, Ranger, help me, J.H. Jordan had known I'd come. Even in her final moments, even facing this unspeakable horror, she'd believed I'd find her. That faith, that trust, that absolute certainty that someone would come for her, hit me like a physical force. I felt something change inside me, something that had been dormant since my last encounter with the supernatural awakening with nuclear intensity. The blessed knife in my hand began to glow with soft white light, and when I spoke, my voice carried harmonics that made the demon take an involuntary step backward. "You made one mistake," I said, walking toward the altar where Jordan Hayes had died believing in me. "You told me where you killed her. You brought me to your place of power. But this isn't just your church anymore, it's her grave, and I'm here to consecrate it with your blood." The demon rushed me with everything it had, abandoning all pretense of human form. What came at me was 8 feet of pure nightmare, muscles like steel cables under skin that shifted between gray flesh and chitinous armor, claws that dripped acid, and a mouth that opened too wide, revealing rows of teeth like broken glass. But I was ready for it this time, ready with 15 years of ranger training, 5 years of supernatural experience, and love for my family that burned brighter than any hellfire. I met its charge head-on, the blessed knife moving like liquid light as I carved through supernatural flesh and bone. Black blood painted the clearing as I methodically dismantled the thing that had taken Jordan Hayes, that had threatened my family, that had turned these ancient woods into its personal hunting ground. With each cut, I could hear screaming that came from no earthly throat, could smell the sulfur and brimstone as whatever held this abomination together began to unravel. "This is for Jordan," I said, driving the blade deep into what passed for its heart. "This is for every person you've killed." I twisted the knife and the demon's scream shattered every piece of glass in my equipment. "And this is for threatening my family." I spoke Father Martinez's final blessing, the one he'd made me promise to save for the end, and watched as holy fire consumed the creature from the inside out. The demon collapsed, its stolen human face briefly visible one last time before the fire claimed that too. "This isn't over," it whispered, its voice already fading. "There are others like me. They know about you now. They know about your light." And then it was gone. Nothing left but ash and the lingering smell of sulfur. I knelt beside the altar, my hands shaking as I gathered what remained of Jordan Hayes' personal effects. Her driver's license, her student ID, a photo of her with what must have been her parents, all that was left of a young woman who died believing someone would come for her. I tucked them carefully into my jacket pocket, evidence that would bring closure to a grieving family, proof that their daughter hadn't suffered alone in the end. My radio crackled to life as I stumbled back toward the trail, normal static replacing the supernatural whispers that had plagued it earlier. "Unit 47, this is dispatch. What's your status?" The voice was purely human, beautifully ordinary, and I'd never been so grateful to hear anything in my life. "Unit 47 to dispatch," I said, my voice hoarse from screaming prayers and battle cries. "I'm Code 4, returning to base. I have evidence in the Jordan Hayes case. We're going to be able to bring her home." The sun was setting as I reached my truck, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossibly beautiful after the darkness I'd faced. My chest burned where the demon's claws had raked me, but the wounds were already beginning to heal. Another gift, or curse, depending on how you looked at it, from my supernatural encounters. I checked my phone. 2:47 p.m. If I drove fast and the traffic cooperated, I could still make Emma's soccer game. As I pulled out of the parking area, I caught a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror. A tall figure standing at the edge of the forest watching me leave. But when I looked again, there was nothing there but trees and shadows. The demon's final words echoed in my mind. "There are others like me. They know about you now." Let them come, I thought, touching the photo of my wife and daughter taped to my dashboard. I'd faced hell itself and walked away, armed with love that burned brighter than any darkness. Whatever came next, whatever other nightmares these woods held, I'd be ready for them. I had promises to keep, a family to protect, and the absolute certainty that sometimes love really could conquer all, even demons. I made Emma's game with 5 minutes to spare, watching from the sidelines as she scored the winning goal. When she ran to me afterward, grass stains on her knees and victory shining in her eyes, I hugged her tight enough to make her squeal. Sarah raised an eyebrow at the bandages visible through my torn shirt, but she didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to hear answers to. Some burdens were mine alone to carry. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at me with those serious 8-year-old eyes and said, "Daddy, you smell like you've been fighting monsters." Kids, they always know more than they let on. "Sometimes, Princess," I said, kissing her forehead. "That's exactly what daddies have to do." Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror and comment your theory about what really happened to Jordan Hayes. I read every single one. My name is Connor Walsh, and I've been a forest ranger at Olympic National Park for 12 years. What I'm about to tell you happened in October 2018. But the story really begins 52 years earlier, in 1966, when something was unleashed in these woods that should have stayed buried forever. I thought I'd put the supernatural behind me after what happened in 2015. 3 years of normal patrols, routine rescues, and blessed mundane paperwork had almost convinced me that the encounter with the shadow beings near Lake Cushman was just stress-induced hallucinations. Almost. The call came through on a Tuesday morning, 0847 hours. I was checking trail conditions on the Hurricane Ridge Road when my radio crackled to life with dispatch's voice. "Ranger 47, we've got a 1054 at grid reference 47T 41839452837662. Female, 23 years old, reported missing by hiking companions at 6:30 hours this morning." "Copy that, dispatch. Victim's name?" "Sarah Mitchell. Last seen approximately 2100 hours yesterday near the Salt Duke Hot Springs Trail Junction." The name hit me like ice water in my veins. Sarah Mitchell. I fumbled for my incident notebook, fingers suddenly clumsy in my leather gloves. The morning air tasted sharp with pine resin and something else. Something that made my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth like I'd been chewing aluminum foil. "Dispatch, did you say Sarah Mitchell?" "Affirmative. Why, do you know her?" I knew that name, but not from any recent missing persons report. I knew it from a file that had haunted my dreams for 3 years. A cold case from 1966 that had been solved with a death certificate and a closed investigation. Sarah Mitchell, age 23, disappeared October 15, 1966 near Salt Duke Hot Springs. Body never recovered. Presumed dead by animal attack. The problem was, I'd been staring at that same file just last month when a new piece of evidence had surfaced. A hiker had found Sarah Mitchell's driver's license, the 1966 Sarah Mitchell, perfectly preserved, not weathered by 5 decades of Pacific Northwest rain and snow. Found it sitting on a tree stump like someone had just dropped it yesterday. "Ranger 47, please respond. Do you copy?" "Copy, dispatch. I'm en route to the coordinates now. ETA 20 minutes. I gunned my Ford F-350 down the mountain road, the diesel engine growling as I took curves faster than regulations allowed. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight I could feel the textured rubber pattern pressing into my palms through my gloves. The forest outside blurred past, Douglas fir, western hemlock, and red cedar creating walls of green that seemed to press closer to the road than usual. The smell hit me when I was still half a mile from the trailhead. It crawled through my truck's ventilation system like something alive. Sweet decay mixed with sulfur, and an underlying metallic scent that reminded me of old pennies left in the rain. I'd smelled something similar in 2015, right before the shadow beings had surrounded my campsite. I parked at the Salt Duke trailhead at 09:02 hours and immediately noticed the silence. No bird calls, no rustling in the understory. Even the ever-present drip of moisture from the canopy had stopped. The forest held its breath like it was waiting for something terrible to happen. My boots crunched on the gravel as I approached the search area. Standard gear check. Motorola MT-1500 radio, Garmin GPS unit, first aid kit, emergency shelter, water purification tablets, 150 feet of paracord, LED headlamp with extra batteries, and my grandfather's hunting knife that had never failed me. The weight of the pack felt reassuring. 37 pounds of equipment that had kept me alive through worse situations than this. The hiking group that reported Sarah missing consisted of 3 college friends from Seattle University. They stood huddled near their Subaru Outback, faces pale and eyes darting toward the tree line every few seconds. The woman who'd called it in, Lisa Chen, according to my notes, had fingernail marks scraped across her neck like she'd clawed at herself. She was there, and then she wasn't. Lisa kept repeating, her breath forming small clouds in the 40-degree air. We turned around for maybe 10 seconds to set up the camp stove, and when we looked back, Sarah was gone. We called for her until our voices gave out, but she never answered. "Did you hear anything unusual?" I asked, pulling out my incident report clipboard. "Any sounds from the direction she disappeared?" The 3 friends exchanged glances that made my stomach muscles clench involuntarily. "There was singing," said Marcus, a tall kid with the kind of beard that screamed, "Trust fund environmentalist." But it wasn't Sarah's voice. It was older, like an old woman singing a lullaby, but we couldn't make out the words. "And the trees," added the 3rd friend, James. "Some of the trees near where she disappeared. They looked wrong. The bark was bleeding." I'd stopped taking notes. The metallic taste in my mouth had intensified to the point where I had to fight the urge to spit. Bleeding trees. In 2015, I'd found similar marks on the cedars around Lake Cushman. Dark red sap that analysis had shown contained trace amounts of human hemoglobin. "I need you 3 to return to town immediately," I told them, trying to keep my voice steady. "File a complete report at the ranger station and wait there until I contact you." They didn't argue. Within 5 minutes, their Subaru was disappearing down the mountain road, leaving me alone with whatever had taken Sarah Mitchell, both the 1966 version and this new one. I started my search at GPS coordinates 47.95394, 123.83762, the exact spot where Sarah had last been seen. The trail here split into 3 directions, one leading deeper into the Salduke Valley, one climbing towards Seven Lakes Basin, and a third that didn't appear on any official park map, a narrow deer path that wound through a grove of ancient western red cedars. It was the unofficial trail that drew my attention. The bark on the cedars was weeping dark sap that pooled at the base of each tree like coagulated blood. I knelt and touched one of the pools with my finger. It was warm, and when I lifted my hand, stringy tendrils connected my fingertip to the sap like melted cheese. The smell here was overwhelming. Decay and sulfur so strong it made my sinuses burn. I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging, but that just made the metallic taste worse. The forest around me had taken on an unnatural quality, like I was looking at everything through tinted glass. Colors seemed more saturated, shadows deeper, and the silence so complete I could hear my own pulse thundering in my ears. I followed the unmarked trail for nearly an hour, my GPS unit guiding me deeper into terrain that shouldn't have existed. According to my topographical maps, I should have hit a sheer cliff face by now, but the path continued winding through increasingly twisted trees. Some of the cedars had grown into impossible spirals, their trunks corkscrewing skyward like DNA helixes made of wood and bark. At 11:43 hours, I found the first piece of evidence. Sarah Mitchell's iPhone 8 sat perfectly centered on a moss-covered log, screen cracked but still functioning. When I picked it up, the device was warm to the touch despite the October chill. The last message in her text thread was time-stamped 2059 hours the previous evening. Something's wrong with this place. The trees are watching us. If something happens to me, check the old ranger station near. The message cut off mid-sentence. I tried calling the number, but got only static, punctuated by what sounded like distant screaming. The screaming was female, young, and filled with such raw terror that I had to end the call before my hand started shaking. That's when I heard the singing. It drifted through the forest from somewhere ahead, an elderly woman's voice crooning what might have been a lullaby in a language I didn't recognize. The melody was hauntingly beautiful and absolutely wrong. like hearing your grandmother's voice coming from a graveyard at midnight. I followed the sound deeper into the impossible forest, my boots squelching through undergrowth that grew damper with each step. Despite being nowhere near any mapped water source, mist began rising from the forest floor, carrying with it the scent of flowers I couldn't identify, sweet and cloying like funeral arrangements left too long in the sun. The singing grew louder as I pushed through a curtain of hanging moss and emerged into a clearing that definitely hadn't existed on any survey map of Olympic National Park. In the center of the clearing stood a structure that made my vision blur around the edges. It might have been a cabin once, but time and something far worse than weather had twisted it into something from a fever dream. The walls curved impossibly, wood grain flowing like water, and the roof sagged in places that defied gravity. Symbols had been carved deep into every surface, not symbols from any human language I'd ever seen, but patterns that hurt to look at directly. The singing was coming from inside. I approached the structure with my hand resting on my radio, though I suspected normal communication wouldn't reach me here. The windows, if they could be called windows, were dark and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. As I got closer, I could see movement inside, shadows that danced independently of any light source. The door stood slightly ajar. I should have called for backup. I should have retreated and requested a full search and rescue team with helicopter support. Instead, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was larger than the exterior could possibly contain, stretching back into darkness that my LED headlamp couldn't penetrate. The singing had stopped, replaced by a sound like dozens of people breathing in unison, slow, deep breaths that seemed to draw the oxygen from my lungs. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the space. "Sarah Mitchell, this is Ranger Walsh. If you can hear me, call out." Two voices answered simultaneously, one young, one ancient, both saying the same words. "Which Sarah do you want, Connor? What would you do in this situation? Would you keep searching or turn back? Let me know in the comments below and subscribe for more supernatural ranger stories." The voices came from the back of the impossible room, where my headlamp beam finally found them. Two women sat in wooden chairs that seemed to grow directly from the floor. One young, one old, but both wearing Sarah Mitchell's face. The young one looked exactly like the photos from the missing person report. 23, auburn hair, wearing modern hiking gear. The old one was ancient, her Sarah Mitchell features stretched over a skull that belonged in a museum, dressed in clothing from the 1960s that had somehow remained perfectly preserved. "Hello, Connor," they said in unison. "We've been waiting for you to come back." "Come back?" My voice cracked like a teenager's. "I've never been here before." The ancient Sarah smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous. "Oh, but you have. You were here in 2015 when you found the first tear in the veil. You've been here every night in your dreams since then, haven't you? Fighting the shadows, running through forests that don't exist, waking up with dirt under your fingernails even though you never left your bed." She was right. For 3 years, I'd been having the same nightmare, running through a twisted forest while something with too many teeth chased me, always ending up in this same impossible cabin. I'd assumed it was PTSD from the Lake Cushman incident. "What are you?" I whispered. "We are what remains when time breaks," the young Sarah said. In 1966, a group of college students decided to experiment with forces they didn't understand. They found an old ritual in a book they'd stolen from the university library, something about opening doors between worlds. They performed it here, in this clearing, on Halloween night. The ritual worked, the ancient Sarah continued, but they couldn't control what came through. The entity that answered their call was hungry for time, for flesh, for the boundary between life and death. It consumed most of them instantly, but a few it saved for later. I was one of the saved ones. I was supposed to die that night, the young Sarah added, but instead I became trapped between moments, living every second of my disappearance over and over again. The entity feeds on my terror, my pain, my endless dying. And every few decades, it needs fresh food. The ancient Sarah leaned forward, her two sharp teeth glinting. That's where you come in, Connor. You see, the entity has grown bored with just one meal. It wants variety. It wants a strong man, someone who's already touched by the supernatural. Someone like you. The breathing sound intensified, and I realized it wasn't coming from the two Sarahs. It was coming from the walls themselves. The cabin was alive, pulsing like the inside of some massive lung. The carved symbols began to glow with a sickly green light that made my eyes water. The entity made us an offer, the young Sarah said. Bring it a ranger who's already been marked by the supernatural, and it will release one of us. We can finally die properly. Choose, the ancient Sarah whispered. Which version of Sarah Mitchell gets to die, and which one spends eternity in hell? But I wasn't listening anymore. I was staring at the walls, at the glowing symbols, and suddenly understanding exactly what I was looking at. They weren't random mystical markings. They were a containment system. A prison built by someone who knew what they were doing. You're lying, I said, pulling out my grandfather's hunting knife. The blade seemed to catch and hold the green light from the symbols. The entity isn't your captor. You are the entity. Both Sarahs hissed simultaneously, their faces beginning to shift and melt like wax near a flame. The young one's features stretched and twisted until she looked more like a medieval plague victim than a college student. The ancient one's skin split and peeled away, revealing something underneath that was all teeth and hunger. Clever ranger, they spoke with one voice that now sounded like grinding stone. But too late to matter. The cabin began to collapse inward, walls flowing like water toward the center where I stood. But I wasn't running this time. I'd spent 3 years learning everything I could about supernatural containment, preparing for the day when my nightmares would become real again. The symbols weren't just glowing, they were failing. 52 years of containing this thing had weakened the prison, and it was finally breaking free. But the prison was still intact enough to work, if someone knew how to reinforce it. I pressed the iron blade of my grandfather's knife against the nearest symbol and began to carve. Iron disrupts supernatural energy, and the blade had been blessed by my grandmother before she died. A Cherokee medicine woman who'd known more about the spirit world than any college textbook ever would. The entity shrieked as I carved, its stolen faces melting completely now to reveal the writhing mass of shadow and teeth underneath. It lashed out with tendrils that felt like frozen barbed wire, leaving deep gouges across my chest and arms. My blood splattered the walls, mixing with the ancient symbols and making them burn brighter. You cannot bind me again, it screamed. I am eternal. I am hunger incarnate. Maybe, I grunted, carving the final line of the binding rune my grandmother had taught me as a child. But you're also trespassing in a national park without a permit. The completed rune flared with silver light, and suddenly the entire cabin was lined with a network of glowing containment symbols. Not just the original 1966 markings, but newer ones, stronger ones, layered over the old like scar tissue over a wound. The entity's screams became higher, more desperate as the reinforced prison reasserted itself. The writhing mass of shadow compressed, growing smaller and denser until it was just a dark sphere hovering in the center of the room. This isn't over, it whispered. Others will come. Others will break the seal. I am patient. I am eternal. Yeah, well, I said, wiping blood from my forehead. So is the National Park Service. We're pretty good at keeping unwanted visitors out. The sphere pulsed once more and vanished, taking the impossible cabin with it. I found myself standing in a normal forest clearing, surrounded by perfectly ordinary Douglas firs and western hemlocks. My GPS unit showed my coordinates as exactly where they should be according to the park maps. But I wasn't the same person who'd entered that clearing 3 hours earlier. I could feel it in my bones, a new awareness, like a sixth sense that had been dormant my entire life suddenly coming online. I could sense the ley lines that ran beneath the park, could feel the thin places where other worlds pressed close to ours. The supernatural wasn't something that happened to me anymore. It was something I could control. When I made it back to the trailhead, I found Sarah Mitchell, the real Sarah Mitchell, 23 years old and very much alive, sitting in her car and looking confused. "I'm sorry," she said when she saw me. "I think I got turned around yesterday evening. I just woke up in my car this morning with no memory of how I got back here. My friends are probably worried sick." I called off the search and rescue operation and filed a report stating that Sarah had been found safe after becoming disoriented on the trail. It wasn't entirely untrue. The entity had been feeding on an echo of her disappearance, a temporal imprint left behind when it had tried and failed to take her in 2018, just as it had succeeded in 1966. That night I drove back to the clearing. I had work to do. Using my new abilities, I could see the containment grid that now surrounded the area, a network of iron spikes and blessed stones that formed a barrier between our world and whatever dimension held the entity. It would hold for decades, maybe centuries, as long as someone maintained it, as long as someone who understood the supernatural kept watch. I submitted my application for a permanent assignment to the Sol Duke district the next morning. I also started reaching out to other rangers who'd filed unusual incident reports, people who'd encountered things in the wilderness that didn't fit in normal categories. Turns out there were more of us than I'd expected. The National Park Service has always been about preservation and protection. We just weren't officially supposed to include supernatural threats in that mandate. Now we do. The entity was right about one thing: others will come. They always do. But they'll find the parks are better defended now than they were in 1966. We've learned a few things about keeping unwanted visitors out. And as for me, I sleep better now than I have in years. The nightmares have stopped, replaced by dreams of vast forests where the boundaries between worlds are strong and the shadows stay where they belong. Some people think rangers just check permits and give directions to tourists. They have no idea we're also standing guard between their world and things that would love nothing more than to turn every campfire story into horrible reality. But that's okay. Some truths are better left unspoken, at least until someone else needs to know. So there you have it, my encounter with the unknown. Did I handle it right? What would your next move be? Tell me in the comments and subscribe if you want more supernatural stories from the forest. My name is Nathan Walker, and the sound of Carol Foster's broken sobs through my cell phone still echoes in my skull 3 months later. It was 11:47 p.m. on October 13th, 2018, when her call shattered what had been a quiet Friday night at Olympic National Park Ranger Station in Washington State. "Please, Ranger Walker," she'd whispered, her voice raw from crying. "Everyone else has given up on Sam. The search teams went home yesterday. They say she's probably dead by now. But I know my daughter. I know she's still out there. You're the only one who'll still listen to me." I'd only been a ranger for 8 months, still had that new guy eagerness to prove myself, still carried my field manual in my back pocket like some kind of security blanket. The senior rangers, Morrison, Rodriguez, Patterson, they'd all written off Samantha Foster after the official search ended on day 7, 22 years old, experienced hiker. But the Hoh River Valley had swallowed her whole during what should have been a simple overnight camping trip. "Mrs. Foster," I started, gripping my Nokia flip phone tighter. "I understand your pain, but the search parameters have been thoroughly—" "She's my baby!" Carol screamed into the phone, and I could hear her husband crying in the background. 22 years old, and she still calls me every night before bed. She's never missed a call, Ranger Walker. Never. Not once in her entire life. Something took my daughter from me. That word, took, it hit different. Not lost, or missing, or any of the clinical terms we used in our reports. Took. Like something had deliberately stolen Sam Foster from her family. "I'll head out at first light," I heard myself saying, and immediately regretted it. Protocol said the case was closed, but the desperation in Carol Foster's voice had hooked something deep in my chest. "God bless you," she whispered. "God bless you, Ranger Walker." The line went dead, and I stared at my phone's green LCD screen showing 11:49 p.m. In 7 hours, I'd be hiking alone into territory that had already been combed by search dogs, helicopters, and teams of experienced trackers. All because a mother's love had reached through a phone line and grabbed my rookie heart. I should have known then that some things in the Olympic Peninsula weren't meant to be found. At 6:15 a.m., I signed out GPS Unit 47 Alpha and loaded my pack with 3 days of supplies. The morning air bit through my forest green ranger jacket as I headed toward the Ho River Trail. Sam's last known position marked on my map as coordinates 47.86 6 degree on N, 123.99348 degree on W. According to the file, she'd been camping at Site 12, about 8 miles from the trailhead. My Motorola radio crackled as I locked my truck. Unit 23, this is base. Walker, you copy? Copy base, this is Walker. Nate, this is Rodriguez. What the hell do you think you're doing out there? Case is closed, son. Senior Ranger Maria Rodriguez had made it clear she thought rookie rangers should stay in their lane. Just doing a final sweep, Rodriguez. Family requested it. Family doesn't call the shots. Command does. You're wasting department resources. I'm off duty, I lied. Personal time. Long pause. Static. Watch your ass out there, Walker. That section of the Ho has been weird lately. Animals acting strange. Local tribes won't even hunt there anymore. 10-4. Walker out. I clicked off the radio and shouldered my pack, trying to ignore the way Rodriguez's warning had made my skin crawl. Weird how, I wanted to ask, but pride kept me moving forward. Rookie rangers don't ask senior rangers to explain their vague warnings. We figure it out ourselves. The trailhead at 7 a.m. was shrouded in typical Pacific Northwest mist, the kind that makes everything look like a Tim Burton movie. Massive Douglas firs and western red cedars towered overhead, their trunks disappearing into gray fog. My boots, Columbia Redmonds, still shiny enough to mark me as inexperienced, crunched on wet leaves as I started the 8-mile hike to Sam's campsite. By mile 3, I noticed the silence. No birds. In 8 months of ranging in Olympic, I'd never experienced total bird silence. Even in winter, you'd hear the occasional crow or jay. But the forest around me was dead quiet except for my footsteps and the distant murmur of the Ho River. By mile 5, I found the first sign. A Douglas fir, easily 200 years old and 4 feet in diameter, had been snapped in half about 10 feet from the ground. The break wasn't clean. The wood looked shredded, like something with incredible strength had twisted the massive trunk until it gave way. The top half of the tree had fallen across the trail, forcing me to climb over it. As I straddled the trunk, I noticed the bark. Deep gouges ran in parallel lines along the wood, too wide to be bear claws, too deep to be made by any tool I could imagine. Each gouge was roughly 6 inches long and carved so deep I could fit my finger inside. "What the fuck?" I whispered, running my hand along the mutilated bark. The gouges were fresh, sap still oozed from the wounds, and the exposed wood was white, not the gray-brown of old damage. I pulled out my digital camera, a Kodak EasyShare that felt cutting-edge in 2018, and snapped photos from multiple angles. Whatever had destroyed this tree had done it recently. Very recently. Mile 6 brought more destroyed trees. Mile 7 brought the smell. It hit me like a physical wall. The stench of death mixed with something else, something that made my hindbrain scream danger. Rotting meat, yes, but underneath that was an odor I'd never encountered before. Sweet and putrid and wrong in a way that made my mouth water with nausea. I pressed my sleeve over my nose and kept walking. The coordinates for Sam's campsite were still half a mile ahead. When I finally reached Site 12, I understood why the search teams had found nothing useful. The campsite looked like a tornado had hit it. Sam's blue North Face tent was shredded, the fabric hanging in ribbons from bent aluminum poles. Her sleeping bag had been torn open, synthetic fill scattered across the ground like snow. A Coleman lantern lay smashed against a boulder, its glass scattered in a 20-foot radius. But there was no blood, no signs of a struggle, just destruction so complete and violent it looked supernatural. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Walker. I'm at coordinates 47.8606 degree N, 123.9348 degree W. Sam Foster's campsite. The scene is..." Jesus Christ. "Copy, Walker. What's your status?" The campsite is destroyed, tent shredded, gear scattered. Looks like something went absolutely insane here. Walker, you're breaking up. Say again. I looked at my radio. Full battery, but the LCD display was flickering. Base, do you copy? I said the campsite shows signs of violent static, dead air. I tried again, adjusting the frequency. Nothing. My cell phone showed no signal. GPS unit was functioning, but my radio was dead. In 8 months of ranging, equipment didn't just fail for no reason. That's when I heard the laughter. High-pitched, echoing through the trees from somewhere to my west. A woman's laughter, but wrong. Too sharp, too delighted. Like someone laughing at a private joke about suffering. Hello? I called out, my voice cracking slightly. This is Ranger Walker with Olympic National Park Service. If you need assistance, please respond. The laughter stopped abruptly, leaving silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Then, from the same direction, a voice called back, Ranger Walker. It was a woman's voice, melodic and sweet. I've been waiting for you. My training kicked in. Person in distress, possible injury or exposure. I grabbed my first aid kit and started toward the voice, pushing through undergrowth that seemed to grab at my jacket with unusual persistence. Keep talking, I called. I'm coming to you. Are you injured? Not yet, the voice replied, closer now. But you will be. That stopped me cold. The voice was maybe 50 yards ahead, hidden in a grove of massive cedar trees. Something was very wrong here. Ma'am, I'm a National Park Service ranger. I'm here to help. Please state your name and condition. Laughter again. But this time it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Above me, below me, echoing off trees that suddenly looked too tall and too dark. My name? The voice was right behind me now. I spun around, hand reaching for the pepper spray on my belt. Nothing there. Empty forest, silent and gray. My name is Legion, the voice whispered in my ear. For we are many. Something ice cold touched the back of my neck and I jerked forward, stumbling over roots that hadn't been there a second ago. When I turned back, the forest looked different. The trees were arranged wrong, gaps filled in, paths blocked by undergrowth that was too thick and too high. I pulled out my GPS. According to the device, I was still at the campsite coordinates, but the campsite was nowhere to be seen. Instead, I stood in a grove of ancient cedars, their trunks so massive that 3 people holding hands couldn't circle them. Walker to base, I said into my radio, knowing it wouldn't work, but trying anyway. Static. Dead air. That's when I saw her. Now, if this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Nate Walker's situation? Comment below. She stood between 2 cedar trees about 30 yards away, perfectly still and perfectly visible despite the mist. A woman in a long black dress that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. Her hair was white, not gray, not blonde, but white like fresh snow, and hung down to her waist in straight lines. But it was her face that made my blood freeze. She had no eyes. Where eyes should have been, there were just dark holes, empty sockets that seemed to go deeper than anatomy should allow. And she was smiling. A wide, genuine smile that showed teeth too white and too sharp. Ranger Nathan Walker, she said, and her voice carried across the distance without echo, as if she were speaking directly into my ear. 26 years old, rookie ranger for 8 months, lives alone in a studio apartment in Port Angeles, calls his mother every Sunday, drinks too much coffee and not enough water. I fumbled for my service radio, my hands shaking. This is Walker requesting immediate backup at... No one can hear you, she interrupted, taking a step toward me. The ground beneath her feet didn't compress. She left no footprints. This is my domain now. Has been for 300 years. Another step, then another. Each movement was wrong, like she was gliding instead of walking. Who? What are you? I managed to ask. The locals call me many things. The Shadow Walker, the darkness between trees, the Witch of Whispers. Her smile widened. But you can call me Hungry. She raised her hand and the shadows beneath the trees began to move. Not the natural shift of shadows as wind moves branches, but deliberate movement, like dark water flowing uphill. The shadows stretched toward me, reaching across the forest floor like grasping fingers. "Where's Sam Foster?" I demanded, backing away. "What did you do to her?" "Samantha?" The witch tilted her head, and I heard vertebrae pop. She lasted 3 days. Longer than most. She kept screaming for her mother. "Mama, help me," she cried, over and over, even after I started taking pieces. My stomach lurched. Taking pieces? The witch gestured to her left, and that's when I saw them. Hanging from the cedar branches like Christmas ornaments were body parts. A hand here, a foot there, strips of flesh that had been carved with precision. And there, about 10 feet up in a massive cedar, hung Sam Foster's severed head. Her eyes were still open, staring down at me with an expression of absolute terror frozen on her face. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, and dried blood had crusted black on her cheeks. I vomited. Hard. 3 times in a row until nothing came up but bile and the taste of copper fear. "She's still alive, you know," the witch said conversationally. "In pieces, but alive. I keep them fresh with a little darkness magic. Would you like to hear her scream?" Sam's severed head suddenly blinked. "Ranger Walker," Sam's head whispered, voice barely audible but carrying across the impossible distance. "Help me. Please help me. She's cutting me. She won't stop cutting me." I ran. Training, protocol, courage. All of it abandoned in a single moment of pure animal terror. I crashed through undergrowth that clawed at my face, stumbled over roots that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them, and fled deeper into a forest that was becoming less and less like any forest on Earth. Behind me, the witch's laughter followed like a physical thing, pressing against my back and making my skin crawl. But worse than the laughter was Sam's voice calling after me. "Don't leave me. Please don't leave me with her. Ranger Walker, she's taking my fingers now. Oh God, she's taking my..." The voice cut off abruptly, leaving only the sound of my ragged breathing and crashing footsteps. I ran for what felt like hours, but when I finally stopped to check my watch, only 10 minutes had passed. The forest around me looked exactly the same as where I'd started. The same massive cedars, the same gray mist, the same unnatural silence. My GPS showed I'd moved 3.2 miles northeast, but looking around, I could have been standing in the exact same spot. "Lost, Ranger Walker?" I spun around. The witch stood directly behind me, close enough that I should have felt her breath on my neck. But she cast no shadow, and the air around her was several degrees colder than the surrounding forest. "This isn't real," I said, my voice cracking. "Hallucination, hypothermia, something." "Oh, it's very real." She reached out and touched my cheek with one finger. The finger was ice cold and felt like it was made of something harder than bone. Where she touched me, my skin immediately went numb, and I could feel the numbness spreading down my jaw like frostbite. "I've been waiting so long for another ranger," she whispered. "The last one was in 1987, Ranger Patterson. He lasted a week before he begged me to kill him." Patterson. Senior Ranger Patterson, who never talked about his early years, who'd sometimes stare off into the forest with a haunted expression. "Patterson escaped," I said. "Escaped?" The witch laughed, and the sound made every tree in the forest creak. "Oh, sweet boy. Patterson never left. What walks around in Patterson's body is just a shadow I allow to exist. A puppet. The real Patterson is still here, hanging in my collection." She gestured, and the forest opened up to reveal a clearing I hadn't noticed before. Suspended from branches throughout the clearing were bodies in various stages of decay and dismemberment. Dozens of them. Men, women, children, all hung like grotesque ornaments. And there, hanging from the central tree, was a man in a ranger uniform. Older, gray-haired, his Ranger Patterson name tag still visible on his jacket. His chest had been opened, ribs spread wide like wings. But his eyes were still moving, tracking my movement across the clearing. "Nate," Patterson's hanging corpse whispered. "Run." The witch backhanded me across the face with inhuman strength. I flew backward, crashing into a cedar trunk hard enough to knock the wind from my lungs. Stars exploded across my vision and I tasted blood. "No running," she said. "Not yet. First, we play." She held up her hand, and shadow fingers emerged from her palm like liquid darkness. The shadow fingers stretched toward me, growing longer and thicker as they approached. The first shadow finger wrapped around my ankle. It felt like ice-cold metal but flexible, tightening like a snake. Then another around my wrist, then my throat. "Let's start with something small," the witch said. "A finger, perhaps." The shadow finger around my wrist tightened until I heard bones creak. Then it began to twist. Pain exploded up my arm as my wrist bones ground against each other. The shadow finger kept twisting, and I heard the wet pop of ligaments snapping. I screamed. "Beautiful," the witch breathed. "But we can do better." The shadow finger twisted harder, and my hand bent backward at an angle that hands weren't meant to bend. Bones snapped like twigs, and blood began to seep through my skin as internal damage manifested externally. "Stop," I gasped. "Please." "Begging already? But we've barely started." She gestured with her other hand, and more shadow fingers emerged from the darkness beneath the trees. They wrapped around my other wrist, both ankles, my waist, my throat. I was suspended 3 feet off the ground by creatures made of living darkness. "Now," the witch said, "let's discuss your ranger training. Did they teach you about pressure points?" A shadow finger pressed against the inside of my elbow, and agony shot up my arm as it found the nerve cluster there. Another pressed behind my knee, and my leg went instantly numb while simultaneously feeling like it was on fire. "How about anatomy?" she continued conversationally. A shadow finger pressed against my side, just below my ribs, and I felt it begin to push inward, slowly, penetrating skin, then muscle, working its way toward internal organs with surgical precision. Blood ran down my side in warm streams, soaking my ranger jacket. The pressure built inside my chest as the shadow finger continued its slow invasion, and I could feel it touching my lung. "The human body has so many interesting vulnerabilities," the witch mused. "Shall I show you what happens when I puncture your lung? Or would you prefer to keep both eyes?" A shadow finger touched my cheek just below my right eye. The tip was sharp as a scalpel and cold as winter. "Wait," I gasped. "Wait, I'll make you a deal." The witch paused, tilting her head. "A deal? How entertaining. What could a rookie ranger possibly offer me?" "Others," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I can bring you others, more rangers, hikers. I know the patrol schedules, the popular trails. I can lead them to you." The shadow fingers loosened slightly, and I dropped a few inches before they caught me again. "Betrayal," the witch said thoughtfully. "I do enjoy betrayal. But what makes you think I need your help? I've been feeding quite well on my own for 3 centuries." "Because you're trapped here," I said, desperation making me bold. "You can't leave this section of forest. You need them to come to you, but I can bring them. I can make sure they come." For a long moment, the witch stared at me with her empty eye sockets. Then she smiled. "Clever boy. Yes, I am bound to this place by old magic. And yes, it would be convenient to have a hunting partner." The shadow fingers tightened again. "But first you need to prove your commitment." She gestured, and Sam Foster's severed head descended from the tree branches on a cord of shadow. The head stopped inches from my face, close enough that I could see the tears still flowing from her eyes. "Kiss her," the witch commanded. "What?" "Kiss Samantha Foster goodbye. On the lips. With tongue. Show me you can do what needs to be done." Sam's severed head stared at me, her mouth moving silently, trying to form words. Blood trickled from the ragged neck stump, dripping onto my jacket. "I can't." "Then you're no use to me." The shadow finger near my eye pressed deeper, and I felt the sharp tip penetrate the skin below my eyeball. Pain exploded through my skull, and warm liquid ran down my cheek. "Okay," I screamed. "Okay, I'll do it." The shadow finger stopped, but didn't withdraw. A hair's breadth from puncturing my eye, Sam's head moved closer. Her lips were blue-white with death, but her eyes were very much alive and aware. She was trying to shake her head no, trying to tell me not to do it. "I'm sorry," I whispered to her. I leaned forward and pressed my lips to hers. Her lips were ice cold and tasted like copper and decay. When my tongue touched hers, she made a muffled sound of horror and revulsion that I'll never be able to forget. "Deeper," the witch commanded. I closed my eyes and forced myself to continue, trying to think of anything else while I violated the corpse of a woman who'd died screaming for her mother. After what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, the witch laughed and pulled Sam's head away. "Excellent, you'll do nicely." The shadow fingers released me and I crashed to the ground. But first, a small modification. Before I could move, a shadow finger plunged into my chest like a spear. I felt it pierce my heart, and ice-cold agony exploded through every nerve in my body. But instead of dying, I felt something else entering me through the wound. Darkness, cold, hunger. "Now you're mine," the witch said, "body and soul. You'll go back to your ranger station. You'll be the helpful, eager rookie who volunteers for the dangerous assignments, and you'll bring me fresh meat." The shadow finger withdrew from my chest, leaving no wound but carrying away something essential. I could feel the absence in my chest, a cold, hollow space where my heart should have been. "If you try to warn them or run away, I'll know," the witch continued. "And I'll make what I did to you today feel like a gentle massage compared to what comes next." The forest began to shift around me, trees moving like a shuffled deck of cards. When the movement stopped, I was standing back at Sam Foster's destroyed campsite. My equipment scattered around me exactly as I'd left it. My radio crackled to life. "Walker, this is base. Come in, Walker." I picked up the radio with hands that no longer shook. The fear was gone, replaced by something else. Something cold and patient and very, very hungry. "This is Walker. I'm at the Foster campsite. Copy. Any sign of the missing person?" I looked up into the trees, where Sam Foster's head still hung like a grotesque ornament, visible only to me. "Negative base, no trace. Looks like animals scattered the gear. I'm calling off the search. 10-4, Walker, return to base." "Copy, Walker out." As I packed my equipment, I thought about Rodriguez's warning about the forest being weird lately. I thought about Patterson's haunted stare. I thought about the patrol schedules and the popular hiking trails and the trust people placed in park rangers. By the time I reached my truck, I was already planning my first hunt. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror and comment your theory about what really happened to Sam Foster. I read every single one. 3 months later, the Olympic Peninsula would see the highest number of missing hiker reports in its recorded history. And Ranger Nathan Walker would volunteer for every single search and rescue operation, always eager to help, always willing to guide people into the deepest, most remote sections of the forest. Where the Shadow Witch waited, where she always waited,